Welcome to Sober Sunrise, a podcast bringing you AA speaker meetings with stories of experience, strength, and hope from around the world. We bring you several new speakers weekly, so be sure to subscribe. We hope to always remain an ad-free podcast, so if you'd like to help us remain self-supporting, please visit our website at sober-sunrise.com. Whether you join us in the morning or at night, there's nothing better than a sober sunrise. We hope that you enjoy today's speaker.
Hi there, I'm Kort. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you for having me here. How does it last until 8 o'clock, the meeting?
8:15. You got about an hour, but take your time.
Okay, so I was thinking about maybe speaking for 40, 45 minutes, something like that, and then if we have some discussion after that. Yeah, thank you for having me here. I'm here because I don't want to drink again. That's the only reason why. I need to carry this message, and carrying this message is one of the most powerful things that keep me sober and keep me close to God that I have at my disposal today. So that that's why I'm here. My home group here in this continent, at least, is Bridge to Shore. We meet on Monday nights at 2218 the L&O Club there, which is, by the way, the oldest functioning L&O club in the known universe, which is pretty cool. My sobriety date is January the 12th, 1999. And as I've said before, I like saying that I got sober sometime in the last century. It sounds pretty cool. But, I barely just made it. Kind of my qualifications for being here, I guess, is that I've been working this program from the Big Book since August of 1999. And just to outline for you guys where I'm coming from is that in about Christmas of 1998, something like that, I'd been both test driving the physical allergy of this illness and the mental obsession for some time. And I was pretty convinced that I couldn't drink. I was pretty convinced that I had an allergy towards alcohol, and I was pretty convinced that I couldn't live any kind of a functional life if I was drinking alcohol. And what ended up happening is that through a series of unfortunate events, I ended up kind of without a home, traveling around Europe drinking, and one of the places I was staying was my dad's house. He lived in Belgium at the time, and I had a moment of clarity there, and I got totally convinced that I would die if I wouldn't stop drinking. And I wasn't even 21 years old. And I can't explain why I had this gift of despair at that moment in time. And today, as I perceive reality, it was only through the grace of God, as I understand Him, that I had that despair. There are people who drink like I did all their lives, and they never get that despair. They never get that motivation, if I might say. So, I don't know. I just was totally convinced there were no empty, rounds left in the Russian roulette I'd been playing. I was totally convinced. So I called, back home and got back on the track of trying to stay sober. And I remember when I was on the plane riding home, I made a short list of what I was gonna do to stay sober, and I remember I was gonna, wake up early in the morning. I never woke up early in the morning if I was drinking, or it's kind of I was gonna do it every day. I was gonna go swimming each morning. That's kind of a sanitary thing to do in Iceland. You go swimming every morning. There are public pools everywhere, and I was gonna do that. And I was going to read a religious text for an hour each day. And so I had this thing, and then I was going to eat muesli. You have muesli here? It's like really coarse oats, really good for for your GI tract. So I was going to do that because I never ate breakfast, and I went ahead and I went home and I got up at 6:30 in the morning. I went swimming. I ate my muesli. Really healthy stuff. And I read a religious text for an hour this morning. It was, the religious text I chose to read. If I mention it, I have offended some people in the past, which is not a hobby of mine. So I just say this religious text is no picnic to read. It's not like reading a comic. You know what I'm saying? I really had to concentrate and kind of work through it, but still I did it. And after about 6 weeks of that, I kind of figured out I was going to drink anyway. You know what I'm saying? All my FIND program, I've been trying to stay sober there been relapsing for 2 years. With all my FIND attempts, this was getting me nowhere, and I felt it. I was kind of getting to know what the mental obsession was like a little bit, and I knew the place I was at. I was going to drink again. And doing my own spiritual cultivating without any action. That's kind of my point. Doing physical exercise and then eating a lot of muesli. The only the only improvements I got from all this was maybe, better stools from eating muesli and exercising. You know what I'm saying? But I was still going to get drunk. Because I'm an alcoholic. And exercise and, fiddling with this and that is not going to get me sober. And I am a real alcoholic. And when I remember when I was sitting in the chairs of Alcoholics Anonymous in the beginning, and I heard somebody say I'm a real alcoholic, my stomach used to churn. You know what I'm saying? I'm not shit. What does that mean? I'm not a real alcoholic. This guy, he must have killed 5 people in a blackout and then stole a bus, drunk, and drove over half of Canada or something. You know what I'm saying? Real alcoholic, that must be something intense. But as I read through the Big Book, being a real alcoholic, according to the Big Book, means basically only 2 things. You have a physical allergy towards alcohol, and you have a mental obsession towards alcohol. If you have these 2 things, it's like a 3 for 2 deal. You have a spiritual malady, in most likelihood, and you're an alcoholic by the definition in the Big Book. And, I definitely have the physical allergy towards alcohol, even with some cool bonus features, some extra stuff not everybody has, like long, excessive blackouts where I tend to do illegal things and don't remember it all. It stops being amusing after a while. And really, really extreme character changes. That doesn't mean I'm a more or less of an alcoholic than anybody else. That just means maybe it helped me get into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous a bit sooner. I don't know. And then, the mental obsession. I believe I don't have the allergy anymore. I believe I can drink again. For any reason. Sometimes I just, conveniently forget, and sometimes I just don't care. Sometimes I just put it in the context of I don't care. I'm going to drink anyway. And sometimes there's no fight, and I just drink. I don't even think about it. And so I went into a day treatment program, and then went into service, and I got a sponsor. Kind of the biggest, coolest sponsor in the biggest group I was attending, and the only thing that sponsor could kind of relate to me was his resentments towards how other people were doing the program. And if there's one thing I didn't need in Alcoholics Anonymous was how to be resentful. I didn't need a course in that. I'm a freaking expert in being resentful. You know what I'm saying? That is the thing I knew how to do when I got into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So, and although I didn't know anything about AA, I didn't know anything about any, politics or any rivalry that might exist in AA, I knew that I didn't want what this guy had to offer. So in August of 1999, I went to a guy who basically just worked the steps out of the Big Book. And that's what we did. We read this Big Book together, Whenever the big book told us to do anything, we just did it, or I did it. And what happened to me is there was a fundamental change inside of me. I had a spiritual awakening. My attitudes, my outlook on life was fundamentally changed. And like it's like some speakers in AA, put it. I got a new pair of glasses. It was like I'd been perceiving reality through a dark lens or something, and the dark lens was just taken away. So reality didn't change at all. Just my perception of reality. You guys stayed the same. I just stopped perceiving you as assholes. I just stopped perceiving you as useless pieces of meat. You know what I'm saying? Because that's how I felt when I was drinking. And so in about I guess it was in January of 2000 that I started feebly trying to work with other alcoholics, and for about 4 to 6 months I probably read the doctor's opinion and the foreword 10, 12 times with 10, 12 different guys. And I was getting so fed up with it that I used to, when I got a new guy, I used to just start like chapter 2 or something because I was so sick of reading the doctor's opinion all the time. You know what I'm saying? Because I figured out he's going to get drunk anyway, it doesn't matter. But in August of probably 2000, I sat through my first 5th step, and since that time I've sat through more 5th steps than I care to remember. And kind of since early 2000, I've been working consistently with alcoholics. And that's the experience I have, nothing more, nothing less. And I've been doing this AA deal as to the best of my abilities. I was thinking maybe that tonight I would talk about my experience, doing that actual 12-step work, working with newcomers, how I work with the new guys, and maybe next week talk a little bit how to, what happens when you get into a relationship in AA, and then you get married, and then you have kids, and then you go to school, and then all that stuff, and trying to do AA alongside with it without being divorced or losing your children. So that's been interesting. So maybe focus a little bit on the second step of the 12 step, the second part of the 12 step, or. So yeah, basically, the way I was sponsored to the big book, that comes out of a group in Washington, Seattle, Washington, and my sponsor was kind of halfway out of that method, but still he kind of used it, and so I read a text. I think I read Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, if anybody's familiar with that. It's kind of a history of AA in the context of Dr. Bob, one of the co-founders of the fellowship. And then there were some hoops along the way I had to jump through, in addition to reading the book. I listened to some speaker tapes, I did some exercises, stuff like that. And that's fine. You know what I'm saying? It definitely resulted in me getting a spiritual awakening. The second sponsee I got, he was dyslexic. Good luck, and he's Icelandic. He's not going to read Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. You know what I'm saying? So what do? Well, I'm sorry, I can't sponsor you. You can't read. You know what I'm saying? Can't read Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. So what happened to me and a bunch of guys that I was hanging around with at the time, that we started, I guess, working the program more out of the book. And just because it felt kind of simpler, and there was when the kind of steps reemerged in Iceland in 1996, this method was pretty rigidly followed, just because that seemed to be the only way to survive in let's say an AA landscape that was somewhat hostile to talk of a higher power. People used to get kicked out of meetings. Not talking about even, they didn't use the word God. They just used the word higher power, and they were kicked out of a meeting. So, there was some hostility, let's say, toward people trying to do this book and do this work. And it's hard, to work the steps and do this program in the book without approaching or talking about God or higher power, as you can imagine. So they had this approach that worked at the time, and as a fellowship grew up that was doing this program, I guess the need for such a rigid or such a methodological approach wasn't needed as much. That being said, I really don't think that's a huge issue exactly how, if we work the steps and we, walk naked backwards through Snelling while working the steps, or as a part of our 5th step or something, that's fine. You know what I'm saying? Or we do all kinds of exercises, and they've helped a lot of people. They do, and they definitely serve a purpose, for some. What I'm just saying, what I found in my experience is that the simpler I kept it, for me as a sponsor, the easier it got to sponsor guys. So basically, what I started to do more and more was just sitting down with guys and reading the big book with them. And as I said in the beginning, whenever the big book told us to do something, we did it. And that's kind of an approach that works for me. And as I said, I think the details, so as long as we follow these directions, don't matter at all. In my experience, I've met all kinds of guys with all kinds of cool spiritual lives that done this thing in all kinds of ways. But I guess what I want to convey is that, if we feel that's too complicated for us, or if we can't kind of reach around those approaches, it's okay just to go with the book too. That's fine. It's not a less cooler way. You know what I'm saying? It's okay just to use the book. It worked fine for a lot of guys I sponsored. Kind of what I was kind of experiencing with that is because I'm an arrogant idiot, and I used to think for a while that I was the greatest sponsor around. So I was kind of afraid that my sponsees would mess this beautiful program up as I kind of conveyed it. So I started out writing a little directions, taking stuff out of the big book, just so these idiots wouldn't, mess up the program. You know what I'm saying? And after a while of doing that, it kind of added on a little bit, and I just saw that this was heading in the wrong direction. You know what I'm saying? The directions are in the book, and it's fine for me to try to improve it, but for me, maybe because I'm especially much of an idiot, I don't know. But for me, it's a slippery slope. Trying to improve on the program, getting real specific. Well, you have to do it this way and that way, and kind of taking God out of the equation. You know what I'm saying? Being so specific that my sponsees didn't even feel like they had room anymore to do, to follow their insights, like the chapter 7 clearly tells us to do when working with newcomers. So maybe somebody is supposed to do something, this way and do this thing, and somebody else is supposed to do it another way. I'm not a firm believer in rigidity at this point, because I just have noticed it doesn't work for everybody. For some, it may work really well, and maybe their sponsor is getting that feeling that this guy needs that, but it's not going to work for everybody. And what I've been noticing is that there's a reason why in the 7th chapter, when they talk about working with others, and in the big book in general, they talk about principles. They talk about principles much more than, at 3 a.m. you're supposed to, do this and do that, and, change underwear and stuff like that. And that's because it's much easier to maneuver, within the, just having their principles, spiritual principles to guide us, rather than rigid rules about doing this and that. Anyway, so that's kind of been my experience with working out of the book. the kind of the method I use, I think, is less important than, kind of than the principles I follow. And so what I tried to do, and this is an experience, there was a point in time I was sponsoring, I think, 32 guys. Because nobody else could be a sponsor, right? I was the best sponsor, so like a half-assed job from my point, it's much better than you guys doing your best. Because I'm so much better than you. So a 10% effort from me is going to be better than your 100%, right? So that's why I took on guys, just endless, you know what I'm saying? And I didn't return phone calls. Because, one phone call a week from me is better than 10 from you guys, right? Because I'm so freaking great. And I found myself collecting sponsees. You know what I'm saying? And I was so glad when I got a sponsee that had some time and reputation in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I got him over to me. You know what I'm saying? I felt it kind of built upon my status in Alcoholics Anonymous. Especially if he had some sponsees of his own, shit like that. So, there's no limit how insane you can get in Alcoholics Anonymous doing stuff. And give me something beautiful and unspoiled and innocent and great like the 12-step, and I'll just disfigure it in 10 minutes. You know what I'm saying? Just completely mess it up. And that's fine. It's a part of the process. So what I kind of finally got around to is that, through a series of hard experiences, was that I started after I worked with a bunch of guys for some time, and I had guys I was sponsoring on a regular basis, but were through the work and were working with others. I only worked with one guy at a time, and again, I'm not saying, you burn in hell if you work with more than one newcomer, at a time, because that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is just after I got to a place where I was sponsoring a bunch of guys, that had gone through the work, and they don't, take all that much time, but still it kind of gathers up. I found out that I didn't have the time to work efficiently with more than one newcomer. And that number might be 5 for you guys. I don't know. I'm just relaying my experience. And it was kind of hard to let go of that. You know what I'm saying? Not to say yes to everybody. And kind of that arrogance of thinking that my feeble, best would be better than your very best. You know what I'm saying? So when I got to that point, I got guys asking me to work with them that I didn't have time for. I just didn't say no. I said, I'm sorry, I don't have time at this point, I wouldn't do a good job if I would say yes. And then I would lead them to somebody who could definitely work with them. And that worked really well, And the way I want to go through this program today with guys is I want to meet them 2 to 3 times a week physically and spend time with them. I don't want to spend a lot of time going through, keeping them in the first 3 steps. I want to read through it pretty quickly and go through it pretty quickly to get them into that spiritual experience. Again, there are always exceptions, and I have to use my insight. And I don't know if this is useful for anybody, but this is my experience that sometimes if they've been around AA for a long time, they know the book better than I do. They've been in Alcoholics Anonymous for 20 years, just relapsing, but they've been here in these rooms. Opposed to my 9.5 years. We sometimes we go through and we do the 3rd step together. We make sure the A, B's, and C's are there. And then the guy just starts writing, after the very first time we meet, because he needs to get God. He's going to relapse in 2 days. And a lot of you guys have probably worked with guys like that. They can't stay sober for a week. They don't have the luxury of dilly-dating. What's the word here? Dilly something? Dilly-dally. Beautiful. Thank you. About with this thing, they need to get some solution, and they need to get it as soon as possible. Then they can go over the nuances again, when they have the presence of mind and the chance to do so. And as I said, I like to spend time with the guys I'm sponsoring. I really take it seriously to answer all calls, stuff like that. It's so important. I've gotten a bunch of sponsees just from guys who don't answer the phone. So thank you if you're not answering the phone. But still, it's I guess it's not really useful for the newcomer. I return calls, I take it pretty seriously, and it really helped me to understand when I was working with new guys that I heard this from a speaker, and this is something I really used a lot and has helped me out a lot. It's if they care, I have to care, but if they don't care, I can't care. And so my enthusiasm is going to be based proportionally on their enthusiasm. And I don't know if I talked about this in the meeting before, but I was working with a guy for a year who called me, and it was probably an 8-month period. He called me every single day. This was I was probably 2 years sober at the time. He called me every single day, and he didn't talk about anything, and I could. He just relayed the events of the day for me, without ever in any context of working the steps or anything spiritual or anything based on his recovery. And that's okay, but it went on for like 7 or 8 months, and he didn't do the steps to the best of his ability. He had a resentment list, and there were 2 things on the resentment list I remember: people and my bank manager, and that's it. That was his 5th step. You know what I'm saying? And this was not a guy who had any problems processing things. He had a good brain. He could read all that stuff. He just, didn't make the effort. And after about a year of this, I was always, well, he's trying to do something. He's calling at least and stuff like that. And after about a year, I kind of realized that he was taking up time that I could be spending with other newcomers. And at the time, I was busy in Alcoholics Anonymous. I had a lot of stuff to do. I was saying no to new guys. So what I basically learned how to tell him was that, our relationship is based kind of on the premises that you want what I have to give. You know what I'm saying? And that you show me by a course of action, not by your words, but by a course of action, that you care about this thing, and that you're trying. Because the only authority I have in the lives of the guys I'm working with is how I spend my time. I don't believe I have any other authority. I don't have any authority how what they work, what their relationships are like, or how, when they stop seeing a girlfriend or start seeing her, that's none of my concern. I'm not the CEO of anybody's life, and that's not a part of my job description according to, at least the way I read the big book. I'm there to relay my experience, and the only authority, the only power I have is how I spend my time. So I try to spend it wisely. And this is what I say to guys when I start to work with them. I'm not their friend. If they need to talk about their feelings a lot, I'm probably, without the context of the big book, I'm not saying I'm going to kick everybody out that mentions the word feelings. I'm just saying if that's all they want to do, if they think I'm like a therapist, or they expect me to drive them around everywhere and stuff like that without them doing any of the work, they're mistaken. That's not my job. We have all kinds of, we have Dear John columns in the newspapers they can write to. They have probably old friends and their mothers, grandmothers they can talk to if they need a sympathetic ear. You know what I'm saying? That's not my job, just to do that. Don't misunderstand, that can't be a part of my job if the guy I'm working with is doing the work. But if he's not, and if I sense he's not doing his best, and mind you, doing one's best can mean all kinds of things. That totally depends on the guy you're working with. Sometimes just guys can't drive the 4-step. They're not capable of doing so. That's fine. I'm not really rigid about it. But if I just get the strong feeling repeatedly that they don't care about this, I'm not going to care. And I explain that. And I never dump anybody as a sponsor. I never say, I'm not going to be your sponsor anymore. I just do this little spiel. I just explain what a relationship is based on. And it's nothing personal. And I just explain to them, I don't want to be your friend. I have enough friends. Perhaps in the future, our friendship will evolve, and it has done so with many of my sponsees. But that's not my primary job. My primary job is to share the experience of going through this work and getting closer to God, so you don't have to drink again. If you don't want to do that, why are we talking? Why are we meeting? And I don't try to be anybody that I'm not. I don't try to be like a crusty 50-year-old guy who fought in Nam. You know what I'm saying? Being like all hardcore and kind of, you know what I'm saying, crusty. I try to be sincere and tell the truth as I understand it, and not to try to be hardcore or giving tough love or something like that. That isn't a part of who I am. I just tried to be sincere about it, and I've said this stuff to a lot of guys with all kinds of past, and they never took it badly. You know what I'm saying? Because I think they just sense I'm being sincere about it. And at least not to me, they've conveyed a sense of rejection, because that's not what I'm doing. I'm just kind of explaining, what this relationship is going to be about. Kind of after I kind of say yes to a guy that I'm going to work with him, I'd always take one session to introduce what we're going to do, and kind of talk somewhat in the kind of vein of things like I've been discussing a little bit now. And that saves me. I've done that probably for the last 5 years, and that's saved me a lot of time. Because I tend to, if I just sit down and explain in quite like no uncertain terms what this work is going to be like and how I do this program and what I have to offer, it kind of reduces me spending a lot of time on guys that are not willing to do this or don't care for the approach I take to this program. And I'm not saying they have less of quality of sobriety than I have or anything like that. I'm just saying that I do the AA program in a specific way, and it's not the only way. I'm not saying it's the right way. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm just saying that I'm doing it in a way that has kept me sober, and I know quite a few guys that need the same approach to stay sober. And what I'm talking about is basically, being firmly based, in God and the big book, and a lot of work with other people. And so if I explain these things right away and explain my approach, that helps a great deal, and that saves everybody a lot of time. And as I said, I know I'm here in Alcoholics Anonymous to represent, or to not even represent, just to be here with the solution for that guy who's like me, that needs the same approach that I do. Now, if a person needs something else, she can, that person can definitely find it in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. There's enough variety here. There's enough, all kinds of approaches to this deal, or non-approaches, or, not using the book at all, using slogans from Oprah Winfrey, and that's beautiful and fine. But that's not going to keep me sober. That's not going to get me sober. And I can't offer that kind of a program, My only purpose when working with a new guy today is to get him involved in the 12-step work and get that into the core of his being. Everybody that I've worked with and has gotten that to the core of their being, that the 12-step is the foundation stone of their recovery, they don't get drunk. It's happened, of course, but it happens much more rarely. People have to pretty work well at it. If they have this idea of really that the first thing you turn to when the shit hits the fan is working with another alcoholic, if you have that idea really ingrained in you, you're gonna work hard. You're gonna have to work hard to get drunk. You can, of course, if you apply yourself, but it's gonna take some more work than before. And so that's my only goal, not to make people dependent on me, but to direct them towards God. Not to train somebody to do as I say and admire my ways, but to go and seek out the newcomer and work with them, and just try to make. And I remember there was a speaker who said this that I was kind of impressed by. He said, that he made feeble attempts in working with others. And I really liked that, because in the beginning I felt I wasn't worthy, and I saw guys with a lot of sobriety talking all this shit, pardon my French, you know what I'm saying, sounding like they knew what the heck they were talking about and working with others. And I thought, well, these guys should be the ones, let's leave it up to the experts to work with the newcomer. I'll just stay here and kind of relax and watch from the sidelines. And what I learned is that there's a guy out there who needs my story, who needs my version of the big book. And he's not gonna be able to hear the version of the guy with the 35 years, who sponsored 2,000 guys in his sobriety. He's not gonna be able to hear that guy. He needs my version of the big book. He needs my approach. That's, and if God sends me somebody to work with, that's because he needs to hear my version of this big book. Maybe he doesn't need to hear it, for more than a week, and that's fine. At least for that week, I won't be too obsessed about how I feel all the time, because I'll be thinking about him a little bit. I'll be removed from myself a little bit, and I kind of realized that I don't need to be perfect about this, 12-step deal. I don't need to say all the right things. I just need to be sincere and try to do a spiritual program and try to follow these principles as best as I can. You know what I'm saying? And just that, being willing to, just a simple thing like greeting a newcomer at a meeting. That's in some groups that's a forgotten art. You know what I'm saying? You come into a group and there's 50 people there and you feel like a leper because nobody greets you, And that's kind of, it says it doesn't talk, the big book doesn't talk about meetings a lot, but they say that in the closing of Bill's story, they talk about we gather frequently so that the newcomer may find the fellowship he seeks. And so basically the reason why we're gathering here is because, so for the newcomer to find a place where he can go to, where he can feel welcome. Not preached to or bullied into doing things our way, nothing like that, just being welcome. And I've just noticed so many times, just the relief, in a face when you just walk up to them and say, welcome to our meeting, good to have you here. Nothing deep, you know what I'm saying? Nothing life-changing, life-shattering, nothing that's going to rock their world, make them find God now. Just being friendly, just be, and that goes a long way, and that's an excellent start. Every meeting I go to, if I can't do it before the meeting, I try to do it after the meeting. Greet at least the new guys that are there, and I give them my number. And I give out 100 numbers, and I get probably 1 or 2 phone calls, something like that. Which means I give out my phone number a lot, but it's the thing that works, and about getting 12-step work, getting sponsees. I don't believe sitting timidly at the sidelines like a 15-year-old at a school dance, hoping somebody's gonna ask her to dance. You know what I'm saying? I don't believe in that when doing 12-step work. I go out and I go and seek it out because I really need the 12-step work. It's a foundation stone of my recovery, And I go to meetings and I seek it out. When I needed a drink, I wasn't timid about that. I never was. I broke the laws. I was rude to people. I stole. I wrecked a whole lot of relationship because I needed that. and I just went out and got it. Of course, I don't need to be, that crass when seeking out 12-step work today, but there's no reason to be timid about it. There's no reason to wait until somebody discovers me. I have to go out there and seek it. And, it's really easy in Alcoholics Anonymous today to seek it out. There's a lot of meetings all over the place, all kinds of service opportunities, and a lot of newcomers out there that are waiting for your story. Not some old-timer story. You know what I'm saying? They're waiting for your story, your version of the big book. They need it. They're not going to get sober unless they hear it or something like it. So, so that thing about some people being experts in doing that, I really don't believe in that. I just believe in if we're sincere and we make ourselves available, it's going to keep us sober and it's going to be of some use in this fellowship. I always explain to the guys I'm working with why I'm working with them, and that's outlaid in this chapter 7 too. I explain that I'm not doing this for you. Maybe on my good days I am, perhaps, if I'm lucky enough. But I'm doing this to keep sober. I'm doing this to stay sober, and that's what I said in the beginning when I came here. I'm here to stay sober, because through experience, I have found that nothing works as efficiently against taking the first drink as working with another alcoholic or trying to carry this message, And the beautiful thing is I don't get paid by results in Alcoholics Anonymous. If you all think what I said tonight is a bunch of crap, and what a strange Icelandic version of the big book this is, you know what I'm saying? That's fine. It really doesn't matter because I'm sincerely trying to carry this message to the best of my abilities. And I get, and it's kind of like, I don't know if that goes for the United States, but we make fun of government employees in Iceland. Because I'm a government employee, I feel entitled to do so here. And it's kind of like being a government employee. I don't get paid by results. I just have to show up and spend the time there. You know what I'm saying? And in Alcoholics Anonymous, that's what it is. I can work with a guy for 2 months or whatever, see him 3 times a week. And if he gets drunk, it doesn't matter. It doesn't reduce the quality of the sobriety I got from him. You know what I'm saying? And when I'm feeling cynical, which occasionally happens, I just view the 12-step work as kind of, getting as much sobriety from the newcomer as I can before he gets drunk. This is, of course, very cynical, but and if you stay sober, that's great. But I need to work with a new guy. I need to do it, and I don't do it for money. I don't do it for prestige. Oh my God, not prestige in Alcoholics Anonymous. There's no hidden agenda. The guys I work with, I'm not gonna ask them to sign sign a loan, or I'm not gonna put it in my resume. I'm not gonna get a discounted Target for working with a newcomer. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing I get from it except my own recovery. And that's the biggest thing, that's right, that's the biggest thing in my life today. If I don't have my recovery, my relationship with God, I'm gonna get drunk. So if somebody's working with you, he's not doing it, for any hidden agenda, hopefully. He's just doing it for his own recovery. And that's it. And you don't have to give him anything back. If you can, try to, and if the message works, try to carry it to the next newcomer. That's it. There's nothing else. There's no hidden agenda in Alcoholics Anonymous. And isn't that a rare thing today? You know what I'm saying? There's no switch and bait. There's no trick involved. It's just, it is what it is. So, is that good enough? Thanks for having me again, and being here, some of you at least. What I was trying to focus on a bit the last time I was here was it's kind of the more practical aspects of my experience about working with others. The 12th step in the big book is having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. We tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So basically the 12 steps are 3 parts. And I just want to kind of reiterate that I believe that, you know, our rigorous 12-step work is the best kept hidden secret in Alcoholics Anonymous. I think that you know, we're not doing it on a grand scale in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I think that's why many of us relapse. I think a lot of the reasons why people have a hard time later in recovery is because they don't work with others. I am basing this on my experience working with a lot of people with time. I've sponsored a lot of people with time, like, you know, more than 10 years, more than 15 years. And and they've this is back home in Iceland, and they've come to me because they, you know, I guess because I was enthusiastic about the program, and I was enthusiastic about this fellowship, and that's something they felt they needed. And sometimes these guys I worked with had achieved the spiritual experience, maybe not working through the book like we've been talking about, you know, step by step, but they achieved it through various, you know, means. Their God, as they understood them, guided them through this process. You know, there's more than one way to skin a cat, and that's fine. But the problem they were having is they didn't know or didn't have any methods or means to transmit the program. And I don't know if we talked about this before, but it's hard if you like do your 7th step, you know, by losing a part of your finger somewhere, you know, and then you do the 5th step in a workshop in India somewhere through, you know what I'm saying? So if you do this work through a non-linear process, it's really hard to transmit that. It's really hard to send every sponsor you have to India to a workshop. You know what I'm saying? You can't go and chop everybody's finger off to give them their 7th step experience or the 6th step experience. So these people I was working with, the main thing I think I managed to give them was not necessarily that vital spiritual experience, but the access to that or the means to go to that vital spiritual experience, but more just a method to work with a new guy, you know, something, because it's hard to meet with a newcomer and, you know, and have nothing concrete to give him, and you don't know how to give him what you've got. You don't know, and you don't have anything organized or concrete to relate to him, so you end up telling him a lot of, you know, phrases, a lot of stuff from self-help books or areas you're reading at the time, you know, a lot of stuff from Oprah Winfrey, if you like to watch that, and those are all beautiful things, but usually they're not, you know, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and just, you know, with these guys I worked with, just when they had these tools to work with, they all expressed such relief, not having to be witty and deep all the time. They could just go to the book, you know what I'm saying? And not having to watch Oprah anymore, unless they wanted to, of course. It's so simple. The program's just in the book, and we can use that. And then you use our experience, of course. And that's a really easy, kind of foolproof way to transmit the spiritual experience. I think another aspect of the 12th step is, or working with others, is it's one of these interesting things, and I don't know if I said this before. I say these things to a lot of people, so I might be repeating myself, but I hope not. That it's interesting. This is the most potent approach we have to help ourselves, working with others in Alcoholics Anonymous. But when we get sick of our alcoholism, or the spiritual malady part of our alcoholism, we feel we're not worthy to work with others, right? We get that feeling that, well, I'm so messed up, I'm feeling like this, I'm feeling like that, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. So, I start feeling like I'm not worthy, or I shouldn't be working with others, right? Because I can't transmit what I haven't got. So, and sometimes that's the way I understand this. And so I feel I need to get well in order to get well, right? Because the most potent tool I have is to work with others to get well. But I'm denying myself to do that, right? I worked in oncology. I was helping people that were pretty sick with cancer. And none of them said, "Oh, don't give me any medication for the cancer until the cancer gets a little bit smaller." You know what I'm saying? None of them said that. They wanted the medication, right, to get the cancer smaller. They didn't wait, well, I just want to get this tumor down to a reasonable size on my own here, and then you can give me the medication, right? No, that never happened. The same with pain, Let me get this pain here, wait until the pain goes down a little bit, then I'm going to be worthy to get the pain medication. Nope, no, just give me that stuff. You know what I'm saying? I'll take it. But for some strange reason, I get to thinking, that I need to, to get better, to be able to do the things I need to do to get better. That makes no sense. But I don't know if you experienced this or not. I've noticed this throughout the years, that this is a pretty common insanity with us. And it's an insanity. Because if we've gone through the work, we can transmit it, And I know no more potent way to get better if I'm starting to get spiritually sick than work with another alcoholic. And this is not rocket science. I do not need to, by osmosis, transfer to him some divine spiritual energy. I just need to give him some experience and some information. That's it. Of course, if I'm walking on water, maybe that will help. But that's certainly not a prerequisite to working with others. Most of us would be drunk if it would be, right? At least I have a couple of days each year that I don't walk on water. I don't know about you guys. So, it's an interesting phenomenon. We get sick and we feel we're not worthy. And I think, like I talked about before, once the idea that the foundation, stone in my recovery is ingrained in me, and once I've seen that happen to other people around me, they hardly get drunk. If that's the first thing they turn to when shit hits the fan, when life starts happening, and we start feeling that way or this way, if that's the first thing we turn to, we turn to God and we turn to working with others. Then if that's your initial response to hardship, I think you're in a good place, according to my experience. If our first reaction is to, I'm going to change my sponsor, change the home group, change, my job, change the geographical location, talk to this guru or that guru, talk to this speaker I heard there because he's the only one qualified enough to help me because I'm so freaking special and complicated. That's so well, and it could be you should change your jobs. It could be you should do that stuff. I don't know. But the initial thought, at least for me, is go and working with others. And hopefully that guru that I talked to somewhere is going to tell, why are you calling me? Why aren't you trying to reach a newcomer and work with it? If you have that solution. Of course, if you haven't experienced the spiritual experience, if you haven't experienced the awakening, if you haven't gone through the work, I suggest you try to do so and check it out. At least, what have you got to lose? I always say, I always try to greet all the newcomers I meet in meetings and talk to them, if I talk about being chronic relapser or relapsers having a tough history, and then I ask them, well, have you gone through the the work and the book? And they say no. And I say, well, that's great. Great news. It really is. And I just say that. And they're like, yeah, they haven't tried it. At least they haven't, at least they have that option still open. They can check that out, And then there's hope. There's hope. If they haven't tried to go through the work, well, it's not an illogical thing to do, right? After all, our fellowship was named after the book. This is the basic text of our fellowship. It's not a really original or strange idea to kind of read through the book and follow the directions in. So, yeah, I was gonna use this time a little bit to talk about my experience and trying to work with others and trying to do this work while with life happening around me. And of course, my experience in Alcoholics Anonymous was that I told you this last time, that I didn't get a lot of sponsees to work with in the beginning. And it did not work for me to sit around, on the sidelines like a shy 16-year-old waiting for the newcomers to pick me up, right? I had to go out there aggressively, not aggressive to the newcomer, but aggressively to myself, and go one step beyond what I dared to do, and greet the newcomer, and it's and it's not really it's not really complicated. Just wherever I am, if there's a new guy there, I try to greet him, and I try to follow the directions in the chapter 7, find out a little about him if I can, I give him my number, and then I kind of use my good judgment, how much I talk or not. Sometimes you get that feeling that guy doesn't want to be approached more, and I'm respectful to that, of course, But if I don't approach him that initial time and greet him and start a little conversation, I never know that, because some of them are really dying for some contact. Some of them have been to a lot of meetings and nobody's talked to them. Nobody shook their hand, and that's why they're looking kind of put off. That's why they're looking kind of scary to approach me. And I know I was. When I got sober, I thought I was a dangerous guy. I was on probation, you know what I'm saying? My head shaved. I was a big guy, with a kind of a dark past, I felt, and I looked at everybody like they beat up my mother yesterday, I thought that was kind of cool. With this sensitive face, I can't imagine how I thought that would work out, but still, And then I stood around these rooms, with a completely shaved head, and I was like a large Russian winter overcoat, you know what I'm saying, looking all, trying to look all mean. And so it's hard to approach guys like that. And then if somebody would come and approach me, I was so freaking scared, I would usually, answer them in an arrogant, disrespectful manner. But I still really appreciate them coming greeting me. You know what I'm saying? I really appreciated it. And they weren't pushing anything. They weren't peddling anything. They were just simply bidding me welcome, and I'm here if you want to. And that's what I tried to do and how I tried to approach it. And I don't know, a newcomer coming into a meeting and not being greeted and not being paid attention to, that's just an atrocity in my mind. I have no tolerance for that. I just think it's horrible if that happens. It's horrendous, and I don't know what the heck the people in that meeting are doing. God bless them. Because if we're not doing that, if we're in a meeting and we have some time, we have some solution. If we're not paying attention to the guy, what are we doing there? And why are we there? What's the purpose of the meeting? What is our primary purpose? And I felt that when I came over here, I felt discomfort trying to, I have a teeny bit of an accent, if anybody noticed. I had a discomfort going up to the newcomers initially that introduced themselves, who am I? Who do I think I am? You know what I'm saying? Like, am I trying to be a big shot here, greeting the newcomers? You know, but it's not about that. It's not about being anything like that. It's just about this is what I do when I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous. This is where my focus is. Not because I'm so holy and, you know, I have so great ideals, just because experience has taught me that nothing works as well for my alcoholism as having that focus, right? It's nothing more complicated than that. Sometimes I do it, you know, for lofty ideals, but, you know, 9 out of 10 times I just do it because I'm there. I do it because I know it works. And I do it because I know nothing works better. Well, anyway, in the beginning, I didn't get a lot of sponsees. I didn't have a family. I was working a job with flexible hours, you know, stuff like I was working at. I moved back home, you know, stuff like that. So I had a lot of time to go to a lot of meetings, and I was in a meeting, you know, every day. I was out there, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of like being a debutante or something. You know, you're just out there, and you're getting to know the people, you're getting acquainted with the place, you're kind of learning about the culture, you know, different personalities, different cliques in AA, all that stuff. And so I could do that. And that's how I did my 12-step work. You know, I didn't have a lot of sponsees. I just participated a lot in AA. I went to the coffee shop before and after that. I, you know, talked to the new guys there. You know, I talked to my friends that were trying to get sober or stuff like that. That's how I got the 12-step work done. Going to a lot of meetings, trying to approach the newcomer in the best manner or the, you know, best way I could. And then, you know, people around me needing help. And that worked for me. I was fine. I don't need to be a sponsor to stay sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. I just need to be sincerely trying to work with or help another alcoholic. I don't necessarily need to be a sponsor. Often that's kind of a logical consequence of reaching out, is you end up as a sponsor. You know what I'm saying? But at least according to my experience, that's not a necessity. The main thing is I'm sincerely trying to reach out there. As I got sober for a longer time, as my spiritual experience kind of kicked in, and it really kicked in after working with others for about 8 months, something like that. 6-8 months after I've been working with others pretty consistently for that time. That's where I got my real, you know, strong spiritual experience. After doing that for a while, I started picking up some guys to work with, you know, and then more guys. And and I kept going to the meetings, you know, and I kept going to detoxes, I kept going to treatment centers, all that stuff. Then I started, you know, college, and I met my wife, and that changed a little bit how I did things, right? I couldn't attend as many meetings because they're on a fixed schedule and all that stuff. But I was working a lot with newcomers, and that seemed to increase. What I learned is that it is really important for me to keep some sort of balance in my life, you know, and for me to follow my third step, what I sincerely believe is God's will in my life. And I sincerely believed that God wanted me to go to college. I'm not saying that's God's will for you guys. I'm just saying I believe that's God's will for me at that time, right? And I sincerely believe that God wanted me to be in this relationship and to, you know, kind of be the best boyfriend and later, you know, fiancé and husband that I could be. And so that's what I did. And I still did AA, because if I wasn't doing AA, if I wasn't doing my 12-step work, that would not work, right? I wouldn't have the power, I wouldn't have the spiritual health to be that guy, you know? And so, you know, that continued. I did a 4-year degree, undergraduate degree. I continued with my wife when I was, when we had been together for 3 years, and I'd been through 3 years of school. we had a kid. Didn't plan on it specifically, but clearly had a kid, so he must have done something. And that again changed things, I wasn't going out to the bar with my friends, so I didn't have to stop doing that. But I was doing a lot of AA work. I was involved with the Al-Anon Club. I was in the board of directors there for 3 years. I was doing general service work. Well, at least what we refer to as general service in Iceland. And I was sponsoring a lot of guys. And I was always working with newcomers. And what kind of changed for me at the time is, at that point, I had enough guys, and I know we talked a little bit about that last time, but I had enough guys staying sober for enough time that, and they kept calling me. They didn't call me every day. We weren't meeting a lot, although I met them occasionally if needed be. But they wanted spiritual accountability. They wanted continued sponsorship in their recovery, and so they stayed in touch a bit. And as those guys, because what tends to happen if guys do the work from the book, they tend to stay sober. Isn't that strange? So gradually, after 3-4 years, I started having quite a few guys that I was working with on a continuous basis. And that reduced the time I had to work with new guys. I felt, though, that if I didn't work with a newcomer too, I stagnated a bit. If I was only doing the work with the guys that were already in the program, it kind of, I think, my experience is that it limited my view a bit, and I felt I was stagnated a bit. So I always tried to keep one new guy I was working with. But that's it. Since that time, I've only worked with, one newcomer each time. And it just kind of came about as we had a baby and the other sponsees kind of grew a little bit in numbers. Necessity kind of forced me to go that route. That may change or may not change in the future, but that's where it ended up. And I think I talked about the reasons for that the last time. Now having a kid and trying to be the father I thought God would want me to be, that also meant time, right? All this stuff means time. And that means time I was doing something else with before. And in my case, that something else was mostly spent in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I was fortunate to the point that, I got my 12-step home delivered at that point, right? And I have quite a few sponsees that got their sobriety with my son in their lap, right? My son's probably heard the big book read more often than most AAs. And he was like a really Buddha-like child, so he would just sit there like for the first 18 months and not do anything. So that was pretty convenient, and that was, clearly something I needed since that's the way it was. And so I started more to invite the guys I was working with into my house, into my home. And I feel that has a real spiritual significance. That they're a part of what I do. They're sitting there often with my son in their lap, you know what I'm saying? We're reading the book, they're in my home, they're in my sanctuary, if you will. They're there where I, spend time with my wife, and, or any spiritual truth about me is going to be quick to surface, right? And I just think it has a lot of meaning to invite a newcomer to that place. And it just says a lot, I think, to him, to how much he matters to me. Not maybe personally at the time, although that may come, but just how much it matters to me to be working with a new guy. It's a part of who I am, it's a part of my family, it's a part of keeping everything together. I'm well aware of, I know what kind of guy gets drunk. I know what type of alcoholic go out and gets drunk. It's a type like me, right? That's the type. And I'm aware of this. I'm aware of that. If I wouldn't be sober, I'm the kind of alcoholic, and I can say this, and it's true. If I'm not sober, I lose most of the things I have today. And it would happen pretty quickly because of the way I drink. And that's just the truth. So, having the newcomer, having the guys I work with as a part of my close environment, inviting them to my home, I felt that's really important. Now, I've been doing that for quite a few years, and there have been one or two guys I haven't invited to my house right away because of their history, and because I know my wife wouldn't feel comfortable with them being there. But always, and that's just me being respectful of my family, basically being considerate. But and many times I will maybe meet the guy the first time someplace else if I know my family's going to be at the house. But eventually it always happens that they start coming there, and they meet my family. They maybe eat dinner with us, or they take a ride with me picking up my son from preschool, or whatever. I just kind of really I'm really fond of that process. And the guys I've been working with for a longer time, I do stuff with them. I was staying at one sponsee's house when I got back to Iceland. He wasn't there, but he lent me his house for a week. And while I was there, I was staying with another family, and that guy and his wife and his 2 kids, that guy's my sponsee. He's been my sponsee for 8 years now. And I've had probably three sponsees, that have visited me while I'm here in the U.S. And I have probably 7 or 8 guys that call me on a regular basis. And that's a pretty, for me, that's a pretty unique feeling, Not because they're addicted to my opinion, or that I tell them how to run their lives, because that's not a part of my job description, but rather that we have a relationship that kind of matters to us, and they know I know their shit, and they know me, and they can trust that I hopefully most of the time will be coming from a specific angle, but I'll be hopefully be talking about this program when they call. And that's the direction, and that I know what my job is, and my job is not to advise them in their relationships or have an opinion about the psychiatric medication they're taking. My job is solely about sharing my experience with the work in this book, and if they if they need their teeth fixed, or they need relationship advice, there are professionals who can do that. Or, like we talked about before, they can call their mom or their grandmom or whatever, people who can have an opinion about that stuff. I don't. I might have experiences on the subject and how to approach the solution, but I'm not going to tell them how to run their lives. It was pretty interesting for me transitioning from I had a kid. I graduated from college in 2004, and I had 2 years where I was working, I did some exercise, I took care of my family, and I did AA. And it was a pretty peaceful period, 2 years. What I do is I try to, my chosen profession is at least feebly trying to help other people. So that's basically what I was doing all day. I was trying to do that at work, and then I got home, and I was trying to do that. I got guys at my home most of the time, most nights. And I had a home group. I had one home group, and that's the way I've kept it for many years. And that's basically since, and like I talked about, in the first 18 months, 2 years, I was all over the place. Because I could, right? After, I started doing other things too, focusing on other things, that changed for me. And since that time, I've had one home group. And I only attend one AA meeting a week. Because there's nothing specific for me that goes on in an AA meeting that I need on a let's say more frequent basis than once a week. There's a fellowship, there's some accountability, there's of course social relationship, all that stuff, and relationships that mean a lot to me. But the real stuff I need, I get from working with a new guy, or get working with guys, one-on-one, preferably if I can. And so that's where my main focus is. And I never go to meetings just to go to meetings. I go to meetings if I need to get some 12-step work done. And so my focus is not on going to a lot of meetings, and like I talked about, it can be an excellent way to do a lot of 12-step work. But if I'm just going there to hang out there, my time is probably, at least now, at where I presently am in my life, my time is probably better spent doing something else. If I talk a little bit about my home group, that's another interesting thing about working with others, is how important it is to have access to newcomers and to have a group that's actively doing, work and actively participating in that. I would have a hard time being a part of a group where I was the only one greeting the newcomer, unless I was like in a remote town somewhere and so the only, meeting in town. I think it's really important how my home group presents itself to doing the 12-step work. That's really important to me. We started our meeting back home. It's a man's meeting. It's called Man Among Men. That's a direct translation. We started it on December 20th in 1999. About 2.5 years after we started, we were 15 guys who started it. About 2.5 years, we were 180 guys in that meeting. And we were all young guys, ages maybe 18. Sometimes we had like younger guys than that, up to 40 maybe, and all full of testosterone. And it was a beautiful thing. You can imagine 180 guys doing the Serenity Prayer. You could hear it miles away. Especially young guys, and all kind of still preaching fire about the big book, right? We knew the truth and you didn't, right? That was kind of our approach there for a while. And we did a lot of experimentation in our group. And our in the beginning, what we used to do, and I guess still sometimes occurs, this is an open discussion meeting, and it's not really an open discussion meeting because we have a chair who chooses a leader, and the leader is always from the group. He speaks for 10 to 15 minutes. Then he chooses guys he wants to hear from, and our conscience has decided that we don't want to hear from anybody that the leader doesn't know approximately what he's going to say, right? So there's no rolling of the dice there. The leader is going to know that the guy he's picking up is going to carry the message. And if he chooses somebody else, that's fine, but it's not going to be fun being him for the next few weeks at our meeting. And he's going to get to hear it at our business meeting. I'm not saying this is the right approach. I'm just saying this is the approach we take, right? And has worked for us. Because what used to happen is that we used to clap and holler people down from the podium. And you can imagine being a relatively new guy, with a history like some of us had, with a lot of drug use, being in jail, all that stuff, and you come into a meeting and there are 180 guys there. And you know some of them from the streets or from wherever you are. And then you go up and you try to do the stuff you were taught in therapy to do. Share like you did in therapy about your day and about your car breaking down. And they start hollering at you, like after 30 seconds. Shut up! Sit down! You know what I'm saying? Stuff like that. And then if you keep on going, After about 2 minutes, they're going to start to clap. Somebody's going to start to clap. And then somebody else is going to join in. And then after about 30 seconds, you have like 150 guys clapping while you're trying to share your message. Talking about tough love, right? So I know some of us miss the drama involved in doing this, you know. So when but we rarely do this now because we felt it was unfair to a newcomer. You know, we felt this was okay to do with guys who should know better, right? But we felt this was kind of violent to a newcomer who didn't know any better and was sincerely trying to do his best carrying this message. Kind of harsh, you know. So we rarely do this now, and the way we try to keep the message pretty clear in our meeting is through the method I was telling you about. We have a leader who's from the core of the group, means he's been in the group for 1 year at a minimum most of the time. And he knows what the guys he's taking up to the podium, he knows what they're going to say. Now, like with every big group, what happened is that we had a lot of groups kind of breaking off from our group, joining other groups, starting other All-in-O clubs. I think there are probably 4 All-in-O clubs now in Iceland, and the first one was started in 2000. And so we as I said, we have a lot of break-off groups, and our meeting, our mammoth of a meeting, it went down, and it's now about 100 guys, something like that. 80 to 100 guys. And it was kind of interesting, and it has to do with working with others a bit, I guess, because I know some members of the home group kind of were scared about that. You know what I'm saying? What's going on? Are we doing something wrong? All that stuff. Why aren't we popular anymore? And I guess I like my group a little bit better after it got down, because it got to be a little bit of a freak show that people showed up in to see, kind of a show, to see somebody being, clapped down from the podium, all that stuff. But the main thing I think is important about our group, that the guys in our group do a lot of 12-step work. And we don't spend the time, those precious 10 minutes before and after the meeting hugging and kissing each other. And we talk about this all the time in our business meeting. If somebody old, that's been in the group for a long time comes up to me right after the meeting, I'm just going to duck and push him away, right? Because I need to go after that new guy. I need to go after the new guy who's trying to get out of there before somebody approaches them. But still he wants somebody to approach him, but still he wants to get out of there, right? So what we do is we line up, where the exit from the meeting is, we line up there. Probably 10 of us, 15 of us, something like that, when we say the Serenity Prayer. So nobody gets out without talking to us. And I can guarantee if you go to that meeting, you might not understand the message, but you're going to be talked to. And you're going to be greeted, and you're going to be given some contact information. And you're going to be given the option, the possibility to get to this work if you want to. And there's going to be people there that are doing it and have been doing it for a long time. And some haven't been doing it for a long time, but are enthusiastic about this program. We had the experience with this that we used to, and we always lose some of the guys. They come to our meeting, they get the spiritual experience, they get all riled up, and then a year passes, something like that, a year and a half, and then they get wise and all mature, and then they don't want to be in our meeting anymore because it's so immature. And and they don't have the tolerance towards the guys that are now like they were a year ago, right? because they're so, you know what I'm saying, they're so intolerant, they're so like this and like that, so preachy and all that stuff. Well, and it's been interesting, and I know most of us who stayed in this group have the attitude that this seems to be a somewhat unavoidable side effect of getting a spiritual awakening. You know, well, you know, we do everything we can to help these guys get the power that propels the universe into their lives. Well, it's going to have a small effect on their emotional life. They're going to get a bit riled up. They're going to get passionate. They're going to get enthusiastic. It's a beautiful thing. It might not always be pretty, you know. It might come with some side effects that, you know, aren't always nice. But that's going to go away, and that's going to pass. And if we're not there to role model how to go past that stage, and I'm not saying it's a bad stage, I'm just saying usually we kind of move beyond that after a while, then what's the point? You know what I'm saying? How is AA going to move beyond just being there, being, you know? So I really love that stage because I spent a lot of time in that stage. I'm still kind of, you know, and I'm still enthusiastic and riled up about this deal. And I don't know. I just have a lot of tolerance towards that. And I think it's important that we do as a fellowship, you know, that there's a lot of tolerance to being on fire towards Alcoholics Anonymous, to having passion, to being enthusiastic. Although other people might call those very same things being judgmental and arrogant, you know what I'm saying? I don't see it like that. I don't see it like that at all. And I think the main thing is that we're sincerely trying to work with other alcoholics. And that's it. That's the matter. And the thing is, you know, I've seen a lot of guys go through that stage and then revolting to it so much that they completely, you know, leave the things that used to keep them sober, that kept them sane, you know, leave the very core of what gave them that, you know, that passion. And that's not a pretty thing either, you know. To see a light go out like that, that's a goddamn shame. And it's sad, it really is, you know. So just, I don't know, yeah. What happened then is we came here to the United States, and you know, I did a lot of work in Alcoholics Anonymous in Iceland, and in kind of the, if I may say, the more big book leaning crowd in Iceland, there's not a lot of sobriety. So I had a lot of sobriety, you know, and I was kind of like, I and a lot of other people, of course, were functioning as an old timers there. Then I come to America and I have like 8 years. That's like, come on. That's not even warming up, right? That's hardly a good start. Just a little bit, but maybe, you know. And I didn't have guys lining up again. I was, again, in the same position as I was a newcomer. I was getting used to that. You know what I'm saying? I had my little home group. I'd been there, you know, since we started it. A lot of 20 newcomers per meeting. It was not a problem at all to get a newcomer, you know. And they came, the 12-step came through home delivery to my house, like I explained. You know? And now I was here, and I was starting graduate school, you know, and we were in a new country, no support system, no babysitting, nothing like that, and another continent. Didn't know anybody here. So I couldn't do the same thing as I did when I was new, right? I couldn't go to 2 meetings a day. Well, I couldn't do that and stay in graduate school and stay married to my wife. You know what I'm saying? All at the same time. So what ended up happening for me is I was pretty concrete about the 12-step. And as you hopefully hear, I'm passionate about it. I think it's the most important thing in my recovery. And I used to count my 12 steps. I used to take one session like this, and that was 1 hour. If I met a newcomer, that was 1 hour. If I did, you know, other kinds of service work, that was 1 hour. I used to do at least 30 of those every month for probably 4 or 5 years. Probably more than that, but I was counting it. I could do an Excel spreadsheet for you guys because I counted it. you know, for that time. You know. So I always did more than 30. And I wasn't doing that. I wasn't doing that when I got here. I'm not doing that now. And it was quite kind of a good lesson for me that although the 12 step is so important, you know, God is more important. And I believe that God wanted me to come here. I believe God wanted me to, you know, be active in my graduate, you know, pursue my graduate degree. I believe God wanted me to stay married to my wife. And that meant doing less 12-step work than I was used to. What I did as I became active as a GSR, I tried to, you know, get into treatment facilities. I tried to go to as many meetings as I could. Sometimes that was only one meeting a week. But I always tried to reach out when I could. And I always tried to do my very best. And I put more emphasis on my meditation. I do 20 minutes of meditation a day. I have a sponsor. I'm more responsible. I guess doing less 12-step work makes the other, it gives me less leeway to mess around with the other parts of the program. Like my meditation, I can't really miss out on meditation these days. And then I'm stir crazy. I need to be spiritually accountable, you know. And what kept me going is that I went into general service here. And that's how I got to meet a lot of people. That's how I got acquainted a little bit, you know, knew what meetings to go to, stuff like that. You know. And I had sponsors, you know, sponsees. I was sponsoring still, like I told you guys, a lot of guys back home. And then I just continued greeting people here. I continued giving out my phone number, and I started to get some guys to work with. And now for probably the last just over a year, maybe year and a half, maybe, I've pretty consistently been working with somebody, you know. Usually maybe 3 weeks, 2 weeks pass in between, something like that, and then I'll get a new guy. But it's not as much as I used to do, and I'm still doing okay. And I'm still sober, and I still feel in touch with my God as I understand. And I guess my experience with this is that I'm trying to do the best I can to do this deal, and I'm trying to follow God's direction in my life as I think He will have me be. And I guess I want to share that I don't need to limit myself just looking at the 12-step, thinking, well, I can't do 30 hours a day, I'm not going to do this. You know what I'm saying? My God goes beyond that, you know, because this is about my relationship with God. Most of my experience suggests that that's directly in proportion with how much 12-step work I'm doing, but not always, though. And I used to be more concrete about it. You know, I used to be more, I guess, rigid about it. My experience now suggests that what's most important for me is to be doing God's will. You know, is to be in that third step. And blindly doing 12-step work without God is not gonna, you know, keep me completely safe or unharmed. Because this is about God. AA is not about AA. You know, AA is about approaching God in whatever way I think my God needs to be approached at that time, whatever that means for me. That's what keeps me sober. AA does not keep me sober. The power that propels the universe keeps me sober. That's the only thing that can keep me sober. This power is clearly indicating to me today, as he's been doing for the last 9.5 years, that I should be active in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know. So my experience suggests that the amount of 12-step work I do is more related to doing my very best than the concrete amount. And again, I not a lot of the guys I've been working with here seem to end up sober. One of them just relapsed last week, and it's a beautiful thing. Then I get to wrestle some more sobriety out of them. This is good. I'm again working with a newcomer, right? And that completely validates my experience that I don't get paid by results in Alcoholics Anonymous. I get paid by the hour, no matter what the results are. It doesn't matter. I get paid by the hour. Oh yeah, I've tried all kinds of things, and there was a time in my sobriety, if you weren't doing 20 minutes in the morning and 20 times in the evening, you weren't sober. That's just the way it was for me. It's a little bit rigid. I have that tendency, just a teeny bit. Then I had some kids and all that changed, right? Now I'm more flexible. Yeah, I've tried all kinds of methods. Now I just sit down and I watch my breath. And I do the morning meditation from the big book. I review my day. I pray for the stuff, guidance I need to pray for, stuff like that. And then I sit down and I'm sitting all the time, And then I just try to watch my breath and pay attention. I read a autobiography by a Buddhist monk who he had enlightenment at the age of 68 and lived to the ripe old age of 120 years old. And he still called his mind the mad mind. Buddhists meditating for 50 years, they call their mind the mad monkey or the caged monkey. So I'm pretty tolerant about how my head is. And I just sit. I breathe. I use my breath as an anchor. Breathe in and out through my nose. I have my spine straight. And then I just pay attention and watch myself, and I lose track. And then when I notice that I'm off track, I'm somewhere else, I go back to the breath and I just repeat as necessary. And then I'm doing some other meditative stuff with some guys from AA, in a group. I go to meditation retreats. I've done a course, which is more part of my 11-step book. So, but basically all meditation techniques, in my experience, are being about basically having your spine straight and using your breath.
So are you trying to stay away from thoughts when you're focusing on your breath? Or
No. Just paying attention. A good way not to stay away from thought is trying to stay away from thought. It's completely impossible. For me, at least, No, just paying attention. Paying attention to the breath. Paying attention to how I'm feeling in my body, what I'm thinking, what's going on, where am I? Yeah, am I here right now? Usually I'm asleep. Usually I'm not here. Usually I'm not present. That's just the way I am. So just the meditation practice is a little bit of an effort to try to be here now, be where I am. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Sober Sunrise. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give it a thumbs up as it will help share the message. Until next time, have a great day.